Good afternoon, everybody. It's ironic that you mentioned getting lunch because we're here now talking about food, particularly space food. My name is Drew Feustel. I'm the lead astronaut at VAST, formerly with NASA, a 23-year career there. So I've had an opportunity to eat food in space. And so a few of us in this room and in this at this conference and Congress share that same experience base. But we're here to talk to a panel of experts who I'm going to let introduce themselves because for two reasons. I don't want to destroy their names at all, but they have such impressive credentials that I want to make sure that we do give credit to them. So we'll start with Dr. Flavia Fayette-Moore, and then we'll go down the line and start with some questions.
Thank you so much, Drew. So I'm a nutrition scientist and space nutritionist, and I'm the founder of Food IQ Global, and we sent mushrooms to space this year as a crop for the first time.
And my name is Ralph Fritchie. I worked for NASA for 34 years, all the way up from the Space Shuttle, Space Station programs. The last several years of my career, I was the Space Crop Production Project Manager and the Exploration Food System Project Manager for the Kennedy Space Center.
I'm Zach Rosenthal. I am the current Food Systems Manager for VAST Space. I'm a food scientist and have been in the commercial R&D food industry for over a decade at this point. Currently developing the world's first commercial space food system for the world's first commercial space station.
Hi, everyone. I am Chef Dahlia David. I have been a chef for over a decade in New York City, co-founder of Heritage Space Food.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Scott-Chamara. I'm the consultant for Interstellar Lab, where I run their space program. And we were one of the winners of the NASA Deep Space Food Challenge last year.
Fantastic. Thank you all. So we'll start with the first question to Flavia, and that question is, how do nutritional needs change from LEO missions to Mars-class missions? What are your thoughts?
Great. So I'll start with how does nutrition change from Earth to space, because we have a lot of data in LEO, as you would know. So in LEO, we need a lot more vitamin C because of the high stress and oxidation. So vitamin C helps counteract that stress that happens in the body. We also have a much higher intake of protein. It's basically double the intake on Earth because the whole body protein turnover is quite rapid in space, and you want to help prevent that muscle loss and bone loss to accelerate. And one of my favorites is vitamin D. It's actually much higher than the recommended daily intake on Earth because in space, of course, you can't just go and get your UV from space to make vitamin D, so you have to rely on food, and it's a lot higher, again, for that bone loss prevention. So as long as you can maintain those higher status in space, in LEO, it tends to counteract a lot of that negative space environment effects. But you asked about Mars. So in Mars, we just don't have data of what are the nutritional changes that will happen for those long duration missions beyond 1 year. We have limited data for nutrition in space in LEO, so we would estimate that the requirements will actually be much higher. Like vitamin C probably will go up, vitamin D, it's also involved in immune regulation. So all those vitamins we don't know yet, we need to do that research. And it's a huge gap that we need if we're actually going to be sending people on those long duration missions, because there's not a single system in the body that's not affected by food. It impacts performance and it impacts health, both physical and mental health. So it's definitely, we need that research, and how are we going to get it? We don't quite know yet.
Okay, and I have a follow-up question and comment then. Just something that just occurred to me is that when astronauts are in space, we're told what sort of calorie level intake we need to maintain, and we really just look at our body weight to know whether or not that's being effective or not. But what we don't know is anything really about our blood chemistry. So would it be important for us to have real-time feedback on blood chemistry as we're taking in the nutrition to know if what you're talking about is having a positive or negative impact on our system?
100%. We need that actual testing. What is your iron status right now? Because we know from a nutrigenetic perspective that everyone responds to food differently. So vitamin C, as I mentioned, it's probably higher. It is the requirements higher in space, but we know that there's genes that influence how people metabolize, absorb, and transport those vitamins in the body. So someone might actually need even greater amounts of vitamin C compared to someone else. And the only way we know if we are providing enough is doing that real live, medical data collection from urine samples and from blood samples. So we do have some spot technologies to determine some nutrients, like iron, for example. You can do, a blood spot test, but we need to develop those technologies to determine that, which we can then use on Earth. Also to determine nutrient status of populations, because micronutrient deficiency is actually a big problem globally. So if we can leverage that space technology, we can help identify the nutritional status of people around the globe as well, not just space.
Okay, sounds like a great project for somebody in the audience, so let's think about that. The next question, thank you. Next question for Jacob. Jacob, how can bioregenerative food systems reduce reliance on cargo and resupply? So how do we basically make our own, food in space? How do we do that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. That was kind of the heart of the Deep Space Food Challenge that we worked on. So Interstellar Lab built we called it the nucleus system. It was a variety of, it was a closed loop food production system that grew microgreens and fungi and had black soldier flies in it, actually. So any of the inedible plant materials would be eaten by the fungi and the insects, and ultimately you're keeping everything in the system as much as you can. I think that's, the goal there is to limit the crew resupply, which is expensive. Anything that you send to space is going to cost a lot of money. Food is probably, more than anyone, there's probably a lot of kilograms of food mass that gets sent to space. And in LEO, that might not be that big of a concern, but for Moon and Mars missions, mass becomes a lot more expensive. So I think any way that we can close that loop and produce as much food there as we can will be cost effective. I do think that there's another piece of it, though, that maybe the Deep Space Food Challenge will hit on in the future, or something. We'll be doing that cost benefit analysis of, does it make sense to produce all of our food there, or should we package some and send it? And what does that kind of balance look like?
Yeah, thanks. And I think something that we didn't really touch on was food waste in space. So we talked about caloric intakes in our previous conversations, and about how the fact that we have a prescription for the amount of calorie intake that we need to have on orbit, but many of us in space don't eat that amount of food. And so there actually tends to be a fair amount of food waste as well. We do what we can to barter and trade and get other people, other astronauts from other nationalities to eat our food. But in the end, there is some food waste. So I wonder if regenerative processes can also address that, where basically you make what you're going to eat and there's not a lot of extra, and that might help.
Yeah, and I think that was the whole point of kind of using the black soldier flies, was to eat some of that waste, or to repurpose that into another capacity that could be used elsewhere. So whether that's insects or some kind of fermentation or something, I think that there's a lot of ways to continue to close that loop and save as much nutrients as you can down the road.
Are you saying then we would actually have to eat the soldier flies as well?
That's up to you guys, I guess.
Nutritional.
You could turn that into growing more mushrooms as well, because they're decomposers, and then eat the mushrooms.
And you could flavor it properly and turn it into a crunchy
Everybody's
snack.
got great ideas about us eating the worms too, you said. But I mean, people do eat those, right? Those can be nutritionally.
When we get to the point where we can have steaks, then we'll. I think you'll like that a little more.
Soldier fly steaks. Okay. Okay, thanks for that, Jacob. Ralph, the next question is for you, and that is, what persistent challenges in space food remain unresolved after all these years of putting humans in space with food? Like, what are we still working on?
So I'm going to twist that just a little bit. I think that what I've seen in my career, even through working through the Deep Space Food Challenge, is that people are focusing on food production technologies. They're not focusing on a food system. They don't know what a complete food system really encompasses. So when we think of that, we're thinking about, first and foremost, the end user, the crew members, the fact that food performs a physiological and a psychological benefit for them. So we have to take that into account. How those meals vary in diversity and variety. The cultural relevance of the foods that we provide, it can't be one solution feeds everybody if we're going to be on the surface of another planet for a long time. Then how do you take the ingredients that are actually produced, how do you process them and prepare them? So those technologies have not really been pushed to this point. And then right now when you see the food products that people are working on, there seems to be a competition and this innate desire for everybody pushing their view of what that ultimate desirable end food product is. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be one thing. People will tire of one thing. And it can't be just something that checks all the nutritional boxes. It has to be something that meets the flavor and dietary preferences of the crew members eating them. So there's so much more to a food system than we've really even touched on at this point. We're really just now transitioning from fundamental research into how do I grow plants in space to how do I actually then move into something that's an application. Even when you look at how we talk about growing crops, we're usually talking about one specific crop at a time. And we talk about food waste and storage. At the end of the day, we're going to have to figure out how do we multi-crop things? How do we take what we produce, which is going to be more than one crew can eat with before it would spoil? How do I process that and store it so I can continue to use it? So there's a whole realm of integration that needs to take place and awareness. And it comes from starting with chefs and food safety, the whole aspect. It's really unexplored, uncharted territory when I look at it from what a real food system is.
Do you think the calculus on that changes as you go from a governmental-based space station to a commercial space system?
I think right now the challenge for governmental space stations is that their focus is where they are, and they don't really have the bandwidth, the finances or resources to think of how do I evolve that system. It's going to be prepackaged for a while. Then we're going to be doing, if we get to the moon, we're going to be doing research first to see how does this new environment affect what we've been doing in LEO. And then at some point we're going to be starting to develop food production technologies, but they're going to have to demonstrate a reliability alongside of the prepackaged food. And realistically, I think that whole arena is more than any one space program is really cut out to do. It's not really the focus of how we get there and how do we set up camp and a way to keep humans alive. And so I think that's where it's going to take universities, global participation with companies, and even the influence of individual space agencies, but not one group championing the whole effort.
So it just got me to thinking about, the fact that for the last several decades, NASA has sort of provided the gold standard in leadership in sending humans to space and putting food in space, but a lot of times food itself has not received the level of funding and importance that it really has for astronauts, because my experience and others who have flown to space, the experience you have is that food is one of the few things that you can actually control in space. You can't control a lot about your day or your daily activities or the tasks that you have over the course of your expedition, but food is the one thing that you manage on your own and you have, autonomy over. But a lot of, we've never really had a strong push and a lot of funding and investment to bring food to the forefront of our mission experiences. So my question is now, we're trying to transition to commercial habitats, commercial space systems, not necessarily led by NASA, but used by NASA as a service. Is this a time where we need like a global clearinghouse or a global research institute or some, and excuse my ignorance on not knowing that exists, but some institution that is specialized on space food resources? I mean, how do we do that, and are we there yet?
And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the
Funny
Deep
that you
Space
say
Food
that.
Consortium, because we recognize that there's expertise all across the world, and we need to bring that together, even from the standards perspective. What food safety standards are good for one nation's space program may be different for another or for a commercial environment. And so trying to get some consensus around what that needs to be, and then also talking about how do I deploy these systems? How do I work together? There's so much in this space that I think it takes a unifying perspective, and not somebody who's championing any one vision or version as opposed to another, but someone who's integrating it all together. I think of what we're trying to do as being like an orchestra leader trying to make the best music we can with everything that's available.
Yeah, I think.
Can I add one thing to that as well? I think the reason why, and I experienced it on Earth as being in a 20+ year career in food and nutrition science, food is underappreciated for the impact that it has on health and performance. If you eat a punnet of blueberries, within minutes, you're going to get an effect on vasodilation on your body, on cognition, to hours, to days, to weeks. Like the effect of food is nearly instantaneous in the body, and it's long term. And I think it's because we live in a world where we reduce food to single numbers, to calories, to fat, to sugar, to fiber, which is where nutrition science was born. But the reductionism thinking is hindering us from seeing the complexity of the food system and the complexity of the human body and the complexity of food. But it is something we need every day, and it has a huge impact on health. So I think it's time now, as the science has moved on and our priorities are starting to shift with also private and public partnerships in space, to start prioritizing food, because it's beyond just ticking the box of requirements. It's not about preventing deficiency, preventing scurvy. It's about like maximizing health, and it's very powerful. And when we do mass, weight, power, and crew time calculations, we've got to lift food as much higher in that priority, because that impact, the adverse effect of not prioritizing it is immeasurable. And I think that's what I'm really excited doing in the space sector, to elevate that, because it is so
Can I
important.
add to what you're saying? Something I don't know if you all think about, outside of the scientific community, the public looks at space food as freeze-dried ice cream. There is a sense that we are, I mean, you're laughing, but if you ask anybody outside of our community, what do they think of, right? It's something freeze-dried and most likely ice cream. There is a thought that, we're still kind of living in that era, but that's the Apollo era, right? That's space food in the quintessential sort of way of thinking about it. But if we're looking at it the way Flavia is talking about it, the way Rolf is talking about it, what Drew would be interested in seeing for the future, what Zach is working on, what Jacob is working on, we're talking about space gastronomy. So the Artemis era is space gastronomy. We are no longer doing space food. So Drew, what I think we need to think about is a perspective shift, a mind shift as a group on how we look at food. And it's no longer about sharing these stories about the old way of doing it, but these new ideas really pushing forward and moving it in that direction. I think this deep space food consortium that's being built out is supporting that. There's a large group that is, well, small group actually, it's like a tiny little cohort at this point. But there is a thought process with the larger community here that we have to consider it as gastronomy and as something that we are creating, bringing all the different cultures from the Artemis Accords nations together to really exemplify who we are as a global community. And I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, Dolly, I think that culinary angle is just so important. We're shifting from a food system where it's a lot of prepackaged food. You just open it up, heat it, and eat it. We need to start considering that culinary impact on the psychology of the astronaut. Talking with Drew very closely in my role at VAST, it's really interesting to understand how impactful even just being able to combine different food ingredients together to make a whole meal, how beneficial that is to their psychology and how well that grounds them. It's truly important, and I think that we're starting to see that with the cookies that were produced, though that took 2 hours to make. As we start getting into more rapid, culinary type capabilities, I think we're going to start to see a whole new paradigm of space food development start to come in. And I do want to circle back a little bit to what Ralph said regarding the policy side. Across the food industry, we do have a harmonized set of global food safety standards. That does not exist right now for the space food industry. It is very much a patchwork of different regulations and still, for the most part, falling under terrestrial guidelines. So just kind of circling back to that, I do think that there needs to be a globalized effort to try to codify a lot of the different standards and metrics that we want to make sure are held through as these food systems mature. From the current, very limited LEO systems into a, much higher population and much more complex food system. I think that's going to be really important for us to develop as we move into this new era.
Okay, thank you for that. I was told to add space anecdotes, so I'm going to do that as we go along. The first one starts with a question because I have to set the baseline. Like, how many people in here eat breakfast every day? Okay, and of you people, how many of you eat nearly the same thing for breakfast every day? Okay, me too. But in space, I couldn't eat the same thing for breakfast every day. I got so sick of breakfast, and it was only a 6-month period. But what was amazing to me is that we sort of take food for granted on Earth, but in space, like literally after 2 weeks of eating scrambled eggs, I was done with them. I didn't even want to see them. It's so bad. It got so bad that I would like start skipping breakfast because I just couldn't face the thought of
Oh, why
eating the
was that?
same thing again.
Why?
I just don't know why. I mean, it was like I was tired of it. It became monotonous, you know. But we can do it on Earth, no problem. Many of us just eat the exact same. I even do that too, you know. But it never bothers me. But in space, it bothers you because that's the one thing you can control. But if you can't control what you're eating every time you eat it, and the menu becomes repetitive, it can be problematic. The other thing I wanted to say is that. One of the things that we also have to manage in terms of our expectations here is that for a low Earth orbit mission where we're trying to utilize the space station and all the assets there, we have very little time to eat. So although we'd like to make food really rewarding and take the time to prepare it and do the sorts of things we do on Earth that make food meaningful to us as we prepare it, the act of eating it almost becomes mechanical in space. It's like, I've got 20 minutes between this task and that task, so I better have put something in the oven or in the food warmer 3 hours ago so that I can eat it in the 20 minutes that I have. And the only real meal that gets to be sort of expanded and enjoyed is dinner. Because that's the one where it's the end of the day and hopefully everybody's got their tasking done. But so we do have this real challenge with low Earth orbit destination platforms and trying to utilize those assets for science that we sometimes lose the ability to enjoy the food or prepare the food. We need to make the food into part of the science, and that's where some of the real-time feedback loops could help astronauts. I think if astronauts understood more about their food intake and how it was impacting their health immediately, we would do a better job of feeding ourselves and enjoying it as well.
Does it seem like that's just another job you have to add on to the list of jobs that an astronaut already has, or do we need a space chef to fly up and help out with a lot of this?
What I was thinking, Drew, with that, because one of the things I've noticed is that I hear a lot of astronauts say dinner is so special because it's your bonding and it's more than just eating. But I think we need to think of that food systems approach, and in those long duration missions, design meal times just like dinner gets designed and not squeeze a million experiments so you can have the psychological countermeasure of meal times dedicated within your schedule. So I think there's other things we can do like that to improve health.
I like what you're saying because I think up there, if you're looking out at Earth and you're living in a little tiny spacecraft with a few different people, you're sort of building out your own culture with the community there, right? So what does that look like? What kind of rituals do you have? And so I think these meals that you have together, gathering around whatever table is built out for you to eat the food on, experience something together as just a group is really important, right? And I know that Zach mentioned earlier about the role of like a chef astronaut, and obviously that would support these astronauts in their work because then one specific person is just focused on caring for all these astronaut individuals and what they're eating and make sure that they're nourished. I always advocate, and it might be because I'm a wellness chef, but one of the things that I think really is a highly functional thing is not just to pick a chef that cooks, but a chef that really considers the well-being of the astronauts. And those are oftentimes the wellness chefs that really think about that and can process what type of ingredients to put together. And the training for them on the ground here will be a lot easier when it comes to astronaut health issues and all of that. They get it. They get it because on Earth here, they are looking at their clients and they're going, what are your health issues? How can I support you with the food that you eat so that you can feel well? And that's the same mentality they take up into space if you were to have a chef astronaut. It's a good idea, but I think one thing that people often forget is that we need certain cooking tools, and I guess the language here, the scientific term is hardware. We need certain hardware to cook this food, right? And I often hear people complaining about how expensive it is. And there's also this element of like, could it be too heavy? So it's finding ways to create a pot, an oven, a food processor, a blender, things that we naturally need here to make pesto, to make soup, to make cookies. What kinds of things do we need, and how do we create lightweight versions of that fit into space, But at the same time, think about how we could utilize that here on Earth and what that could do for the cooking tools that we use here and how much more highly functioning the things that we have here would be if we were to discover what to do for space. So I think there's a lot of value add as a chef to even consider that.
Okay, Chef David, I'll ask the actual question that I was going to ask you and see. I think you mostly answered it, but the question
Did I
was,
answer it?
how do you see chefs contributing to the design of food systems for space? And I think you already touched on
You
some
know,
of that.
I do
but-
want to mention something. I am a little salty about the fact that for a long time it was just the space food engineers working on the food. How could you not invite the chefs into this conversation? Obviously, you're eating crappy food for that reason. Come on now. It is, I just think it's common sense to have that collaboration happening, right? So I'm just happy that we're kind of in a phase, Artemis era, space gastronomy, that we're finally doing that.
Yeah, do you want to talk at all about specialized space food? We've had instances of crews being able to send, tailored foods to space that have been made by chefs on Earth. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, so we have a colleague. Her name is Cherise Gray. She's absolutely lovely. She works with Jose Andres at their research group, and she supported Jose Andres's colleague, Spanish astronaut whose name I cannot remember. Maybe somebody in the audience will, but she made a chicken mushroom paella and sent it up to space. It was an Axiom mission. That's what I know. If anybody knows any of that astronaut, please raise your hand. There you go. And so, that was a lovely meal that she put a lot of effort into, and you should just hear her talk about in detail just the thought process of what it takes to consider the changes in flavor perception up in microgravity and how she thought about what she needed to do when it came to enhancing certain spices and salts and all of that, because as some of you know, or maybe all of you know, food just tastes different in microgravity. And so you have to think about the richness in umami and upping the spice factor and maybe increasing the sour and the sweet, because those are things that people often don't get to taste as well. And you really reach for the spice when you can't taste other things when your nose is stuffy. So she put a lot of effort and thought into that. And I think there is a lot of consideration to having chefs in that conversation with space food engineers, because she's still working on things. And right now she's using a tool called Sated. It's a Jim Sears invention. God, how do I describe it? Who knows how to describe this thing?
It's like
So
a thermal
spinning,
mix.
uh,
It's a
pizza
spinning, yeah, and you can make chicken teriyaki and a birthday cake in it. It's really cool. But I mention this because this is not just it. This is just the beginning. These are great ideas. So come up with more. People in this room, come up with more hardware. Think of ways that we can cook in space and come up with that.
That's a great lead into Zach's.
Well, I was going to follow up real quick. I think there's definitely a really good focus on the chef element here. I think that's extremely important for the culinary side. But I think there's another element here that we need to talk about, in that in order to actually successfully commercialize these products and send them up safely, I think that's a really key element here. We're going to need the food scientists, the food engineers, the food safety specialists. We need to develop a full-on food system and a way of thinking about space food that isn't just focusing on one specific target area, but it takes into account the entire picture. Because there's only one way in which we can be successful in this, and that's if we all work together within our own interdisciplinary areas to execute on the goals. With Flavia on the nutrition side, Ralph on his end, Dali on her end, Jacob on his end. I think we all need to come together to really bring this food system as a system. It's not one individual part; it's the sum of all the parts.
Okay, well, since you work for VAST, and I happen to work for VAST as well, I'll ask you the question of how might Haven 1 serve as a test bed for?
Yeah, I think Haven 1 serves as a really great test bed for the kind of launching point that we're looking at here for this commercial space food system. Haven 1 represents a shorter duration mission length than what we're seeing on the ISS. So it's a really great opportunity for us to test a lot of these technologies that we need to prove out in LEO in order to do things like support the Artemis missions or support the Mars missions. It's a really great platform. It's also a really great platform for us to understand things like nutrient degradation, nutrition, being that we are going to be, pre-positioning quite a bit of food for a long period of time. These are realistic studies that we can conduct on Haven 1 in space, that are real, with real hardware that's actually going up, no earlier than 2026. So I think Haven 1 really presents a really unique opportunity for a lot of the systems and whatnot that we've been talking about today to actually become truly implemented and usable by astronauts like Drew.
Okay, and I'll ask, we got through all the official technical questions, but I want to then open up a few different ones. And my question is, I did talk about NASA and NASA's ability to supply food to astronauts for the last several decades. Are there assets that NASA has that we could use as commercial industry in our process, like leverage off of that and grow from what they've done, those people, those facilities, that sort of thing?
Oh, there definitely needs to be a symbiotic relationship between the commercial entities and the public entities that are out there. At the end of the day, when you go to a grocery store, when you walk around, you look at all the different products, there's maybe hundreds, if not thousands, of companies making every individual one of those products that are out there. As a commercial food provider, space food provider, that is a big task to produce every single one of those products to give the crew truly a Earth-like food experience. So that's where we need to leverage both NASA's capabilities as well as the commercial food industry's capabilities. That allows us to create a foundation and a base for the food that we need to send up for the astronauts to have them enjoy. And then that's where each individual commercial space company with their space food programs can come in and develop the individual items that are needed for things like the beneficial nutrition, specific flavor profiles, anything that is needed that we can fill the gaps in that the commercial food industry can't provide. I think that's a really important hybrid kind of sourcing model that we at VAS are exemplifying with our food system. I think is going to be the basis of any sort of short-term or even long-term mission by a commercial space food provider. Drew, I would love to know, what's your favorite space food that you had in space? Was it something that was produced by NASA, or was it a commercial food product that they sent up?
Is Nutella a food?
Nutella is indeed a food.
I have an interesting story about Nutella. I had a bunch of Nutella launched to space for my expedition in 2018, and I made the mistake of making that available to my crew members. And I quickly realized that they liked Nutella as much as I did, and so most of my Nutella disappeared. So my wife, who's here, can attest to the fact that I sent her like an email. And I was like, on the next cargo supply ship, I need you to put more Nutella in there, but don't tell anybody that it's coming. And then when it got to space, I hid it all because it was mine, and I wanted to eat it, and I didn't want it to disappear. So yeah, that was my favorite food, and I had to figure out how to ration that for myself.
I love that anecdote, Drew, and I think that's a really great example of how, there's so much investment that has gone into the, NASA space food system. But Drew just mentioned it was a commercial food product. That was his favorite product. It's something that really grounded him to Earth. It's something that benefited him psychologically and the rest of the crew. And I think that's a really good example of where the commercial food industry, where I came from, can really be of great importance and assistance with helping develop and implement the next generation of space food systems.
Yeah, and
I was just going to say, from someone who works with the food industry and with food on Earth as well, there's a lot of opportunities for the food industry and the food systems on Earth to spin into space, and that's a perfect example. There's the Tang, which we call cordial in Australia, is just one famous example that's still being used. But there's, I talk a lot about how space is going to help feed our future, and when I talk to other people that are in the industry that aren't in space, they realize what we mean by that, because there are products that exist already on Earth that we can utilize in space, that it's like designed for space, that they don't know that it is.
Why reinvent the wheel?
Exactly, right? So one example is an Australian company that makes herbs called McCormick's. They make this 8-gram sachet of dehydrated herbs that look super bright green, that are super tasty, that are super light, and full of those bioactive compounds that are really healthy. That they never thought about that being a space food. So it's about making those connections to go, hey, let's not reinvent the wheel, because like you said, VAST can't do everything and produce the whole food system in space, but we can leverage the space system to advance food and science and technology on Earth to feed us here as well.
I also think there's an opportunity for new trends in food to occur because we are trying to solve certain astronaut health issues. So if there is a ingredient that is considered new, but maybe something that the First Nations have known for a long time and can be supportive to astronaut health, it is a really good way to help to highlight original cultures of this earth and provide and give back to them, and also bring it forth as something of an opportunity for space food. So I think there's like a, you've heard of quinoa and fonio and matcha. Those are like the old superfoods, but there is an avenue here with space food and certain ingredients that are beneficial for astronaut health to also be, really great terrestrially in the same application, or maybe slightly different because it's on Earth. And I think there's value in considering new food trends and what that could look like and what that could mean. And when I say new, it's just more like ancient ideas that we're pulling from way back when, and we're bringing it and we're saying this is considered as the new matcha, if you will.
So you
What'd you
jump
say?
on another aspect, and that is that space is the perfect place to demonstrate the sustainability of the foods that we actually produce, eat, and how we handle the refuse or the waste from. What we need to do eventually is we're going to be trying to close that mass loop and use as much of everything as we can. And we see that already embedded in some of the cultures, especially like in the Scandinavian cultures, huge on sustainability. So that's something we need to leverage, is work that's already going on. And we don't want to make it seem like space is this unique case that has no relevance to Earth. It has a direct relevance to Earth, not only from the sustainability side of things, but from the wellness side of things. If we can continue to influence our cultures to eat healthier and be more careful about what they eat and how they handle that food, that's part of what space can actually reinforce. So to me, it's very appropriate that space serves as a goal and something that's potentially just out of reach for a lot of people in terms of the technologies that they're developing, the products they're trying to produce, but also how we as a planet need to live. When we think about it, I tell people that by the year 2050, we're looking to feed maybe 10 people on the surface of the moon, but here on Earth, we're looking to feed 10 billion people. And how do I leverage both of those to the maximum extent possible?
Well, that's what, Ralph, I think that we're talking about how a lot of the technology that we use on Earth can be incorporated into space. And I think that a lot of these bioregenerative systems that we're talking about, those can easily be implemented on Earth, I think, today, and used in a variety of sources. I think on Navy ships, Antarctic bases, there's a lot of isolated places where having closed-loop food production systems might have very real applications. And if space is kind of driving those constraints that have dual-use capabilities on Earth, I think that there's a potential way to push that technology in space as well and get more funding for the space too, because these things are going to require capital to develop.
Yeah, we need to feed people on Earth here today, now.
Right.
Refugee camp situations, things like that. And so if it takes us solving those problems along the way, then that's what we're all about.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of analogous situations here on Earth that we can apply to space. When we started developing our food system here at VAST, we looked into how submarines were taking care of their food, how the Antarctic bases, how ships that are transiting the ocean for long periods of time are handling their food. There's very valuable lessons that we can learn here from Earth. And I think there's also very valuable lessons that Earth can learn from how we're handling the food in space. A lot of learnings, and I think that Earth orbit to Earth feedback loop is going to be really important to emphasize to the public as we start to socialize the benefits of space food and how these commercial partnerships and how all these different things that we've been talking about here can come together to generate that next generation of food systems.
And so we're down to the last 6 or so minutes, and I was going to summarize the event, but you guys already kind of did that. I want to thank you, panelists, for coming up here and sharing your expertise. It's amazing, and I'm sure there's a significant amount of expertise also in the audience. So I applaud all of you for the work that you're doing to bring food really to the level of importance that it has for space missions, not only low Earth orbit, but for deep space missions as well. And I fully agree that as we increase our population on the planet, it's going to become more and more important for us to understand the impact of feeding the 7 billion heading to 8 or 9 billion people on our planet Earth. It's going to become a challenge. And I think by creating the efficiencies that we will for space food, and surviving in space, those things are going to help us to do better here on our own planet. But thank you all for highlighting the current gaps and needs that we have, and I encourage everybody to maybe take something away from here and see if you can contribute or get in on the consortium to help make space a better place to enjoy culinary treats and maybe make better here on Earth too. So thanks to all of you.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
I don't think we're doing Q&A. We're so unless someone has you guys have any closing remarks or.
I think the only closing remark I would have is that, I think one really important thing that we didn't really touch on too much is how relatable food is for people on Earth and the communication of the missions that we have in space. When I tell people I work at VAST, before they even know what I do for VAST, the first thing they say is, "Oh, what are the astronauts going to eat?" And I tell them, well, you're talking to exactly the right person about that. And I think it's something that the average person can really grasp. It's something they experience every day. And I think it's something that is really clearly needed investment on for how we develop these next generation systems and how we're going to need to advance humanity in low Earth orbit and beyond.
I've said this to you before, and this is not a paid-for advertisement, that I really commend VAST for having this vision to look at this way. Having worked in the food system for NASA for a long time on bioregenerative foods, it was always an uphill struggle. We have a food system for Mars that's red from the Human Research Program with no real way of solving it. We know that energy is the most important thing for the machines and the hardware that we're flying, so we're focusing on reactors on the moon. But food, the energy for humans, is still red. And I think the fact that the folks at VAST are really focusing on food is highly commendable, and I really thank you for that.
Thanks, Ralph. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you again to our panelists. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the Congress, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the VAST booth. Come and see us at 513.